Well, hi, y'all. Welcome to the thesis proposal of Elias Sherburne. I'm really excited to have so many faces in the room today. I'm going to let Elias introduce the project on kind of through the work when they start presenting, but I'll give you a little bit of a rundown of what to expect for this conversation. Once we get started, Elias will present for about 15-20 minutes, and then we'll open up some discussion for questions. And this is primarily for the academic panel supporting the discussion, but everybody's welcome to contribute and ask questions too. There's a little, if you hover over your screen, there's a little raise hand function. If you click on the participants panel at the bottom, it'll pull up a panel at the side, and you'll see a little hand that you can click to raise your hand and ask questions for those of you who haven't done it before. And I'll kind of keep an eye on the questions so that Elias can focus on presenting and answering instead of managing. But that's just to make sure we get everybody, who wants to ask a question doing it. If anybody's not comfortable asking with the raised, verbally, you can also add something to the chat if you'd like, and we'll try to get to all of those as well. Once we're satisfied, and there's a little bit of time left still, I'll ask you guys to take yourselves off mute and we'll cheer, and you can say lots of supportive things, and then we have one little part of the discussion left, which will require everybody to get off the call, and we'll just convene with Elias and the rest of the panel for a quick conversation. So I think that's everything. Without further ado, here's Elias.
Sweet. All right. Hello, I'm Elias Sherburne, and welcome to my thesis proposal for Hiraeth. And I gotta click on this. There we go. So, two non-binary characters leave their desolate home to find the magic orb with the power to bring life back to the farmland their families depend on, traveling through the magical world in a series of illustrations and GIFs. The visual backgrounds will break down ecological concepts of desolation and the negative effects of human impact on nature, so they're accessible to kids, teens, and adults, while providing hope in the form of an orb of a future without pollution. The illustrations and GIFs will feature lineless background work, color palettes to convey tone and mood, and a mix of digital and traditional textures. I think we can all agree that the events that have occurred since the start of this year have been absolutely insane. Over the summer, there were forest fires burning all over the West Coast, with the fires in Oregon getting uncomfortably close to the Portland metro area. Some good things have happened as well this year. For instance, Elliot Page, a prominent actor, came out as transgender yesterday. And just a few weeks earlier in Delaware, Sarah McBride won her election and will be the first transgender senator. I grew up in the Portland, Vancouver area and spent a lot of time around Mount Adams visiting my grandparents who lived there. Over time, the forest became a type of sanctuary for me, where I can go to relax and ground myself, along with gaining inspiration for my artistic practice. The last 10 years have been difficult to watch happen, as there have been several large forest fires on Mount Adams, as well as the Eagle Creek fire that burned in the gorge in 2017. I watched as our local environment changed from droughts, fires, storms, and human damage, and I began to try to understand how climate change is affecting the area right around me. I think we can all remember September a little bit too well, when the wind conditions caused the air to become heavily polluted with smoke from the fires, making it unbreathable and resulting in those nightmarish 2 weeks where going outside was just not possible. With the consequences of environmental contamination affecting our daily lives, it has become clear that climate change is not something that can be ignored, and it needs to be talked about. And to me, it's become something I want to use my art to address. The setting of my thesis starts off in a small, partially abandoned town where the local farms have struggled to grow crops due to intense ecological desertification from human environmental abuse. My intent is to start a conversation about climate change and human involvement alongside educating my audience on the very real existence of areas where desertification has occurred. While it is not possible to find a magic orb to solve our environmental problems in real life, there are areas of desert which have been successfully restored to healthy ecosystems. So the hope really is out there. Moving on to take a step back from the environmental side of things, I have made it a priority to break away from the standard gender binary with every character I design. Coming from someone who is trans, the transgender representation in mainstream media is horrible. It has gotten better over the last few years, but trans characters are still very rare, and trans characters and plots that reflect real life experiences are even harder to find. However, when there is a well-written moment, I often think about how my own experience could have changed if I had been exposed to transgender characters as a kid. And that motivates me to create my own content where it is normal and accepted to be trans. I'm using my thesis project to provide greater representation for transgender identities and normalizing the deconstruction of the gender binary. I'm making content with the representation I want to see and using it as an opportunity to expose children and adults who are unfamiliar with the trans community to gender shown as a spectrum rather than a binary defined by the sex you are assigned at birth. I'll be using a mix of illustration and animation to build a world that is fantastical while still resembling our own through a style that emphasizes shape, texture, movement, and color. Since the plot focuses on bringing life to things, literally, they're taking still illustrations and adding movement to them through animation, literally bringing them to life, strengthens the impact of the events throughout their quest. I have found that I can best express my intent through a mix of digital and traditional media. Digital apps like Procreate have added fantastic textured brushes that mimic their real-life counterparts, so I'll be able to bring traditional textures into digital animation. My overall color palette includes a mix of jewel and neutral tones. The more saturated colors adding a magical feeling to the work, along with creating a bright, positive mood throughout the journey. Moving into the actual story, two kids set out from their hometown on a quest to retrieve a magic orb of life from the distant forest to save their home from desertification and starvation. They begin by traveling through the dead forest, a desolate landscape dotted with twisted, burned remnants of trees, a cursed place where the only life that exists is toxic and inedible. Their path then takes them through the fall woods, an area where it is always autumn. Life is always in the process of slowly dying in preparation for a winter that never comes. The closer the two get to the forest, the more edible plants begin to pop up as vegetation grows healthier and more dense. Halfway through the woods, they come across a strange house and meet the mage, a reserved character who has spent their whole life researching and studying the orbs of life and the magical life-giving forest that creates them. Once the characters reach the forest, they are able to retrieve the orb from its resting place without difficulty. However, as they begin their return journey, the orb acts as a beacon, at first only illuminating peaceful ghostly spirits. But as the pair leaves the forest, twisted creatures with half-lives are drawn towards the orb's life-giving power, and the two must face them to survive. Time to meet the main characters. This is Zephyr and Moira, two non-binary teens who've grown up together. I have their initial character designs complete with some costuming and color exploration. My work styles can be broken into high render, mid render, and finished sketch or line work. I go between the three to use whichever fits that specific piece best. I'm overall aiming for a soft, rounder stylization to connect with a younger audience, while the overall themes are complex enough to appeal to all ages. I intend this project to provide comfort and inspire hope in the face of global climate change and transphobia. Moving on to the technical stuff. For my first 2.5 years at Pnca, I was actually an animated arts major. And although I switched to illustration, animation is still a core part of my artistic practice, and my work explores the area where animation and illustration meet. I have worked extensively with animation tools in Procreate, Photoshop, Clip Studio Paint, and After Effects on projects including an animated short film. Within my technical practice, or traditional practice, I've gravitated towards gouache, watercolor, and colored pencils. My development work will include a storyboard for each GIF, 2 to 3 character design sheets, 3 to 4 world development sheets, additional creature design, and key object reference sheets, as well as color palette, color keys, texture exploration, and the written plotline. The default size for my illustrations will be 11 by 8.5. GIFs will be 1080 by 1920, and the number of illustrations range between 3 and 5, number of GIFs between 3 and 5, with a total of 8 to 10 pieces. My world and character development starts with a mood board, which I use as a reference sheet for world and character design spreads. Each design sheet is done in Procreate and identifies key elements of plant life, clothing, and stylization, as seen on these completed biome reference sheets. My process for each illustration starts traditionally with thumbnail ideation on paper before moving into a digital rough sketch in Procreate. From here, I take it to final using Procreate, or traditionally by printing the sketch out on 8.5 by 11 Bristol paper and working over top of it with gouache, watercolor, and/or colored pencils. Any traditional work then gets scanned in at 300 DPI or higher, and it is combined with digital edits and additions. The process for animation for me is similar. I start out with traditional storyboard thumbnails, put them into Procreate to turn them into the first draft of the storyboard, and then review my drafts, make edits, work out timing, and apply color keys. I make the background and any static assets using a condensed version of my illustration practice and process. I then use Procreate or Clip Studio to animate the moving elements and add additional texture or color details. Next, I bring everything into After Effects and I combine it all into a final comp. My post-proposal timeline can be broken down into 4 sections. Sections 1 through 3 representing 4 weeks each, and section 4 representing week 13. During section 1, I'm aiming to refine the development of my characters, thumbnail out the whole plot line, bring illustrations to a final sketch with color indicated, and complete all of the GIF storyboards and turn them into animatics with color keys. The second part brings illustrations to the final draft. I will have all my GIF assets completed. Keyform animation will be completed as well. And then in 3, I will have my animation colored, compiling everything into final GIFs and making all the final little adjustments to illustrations. During the 4th part, I will be exporting my final GIFs, setting up the digital display platform, and uploading and finalizing all of the digital layouts for GIFs and illustrations. Ideally, I would love to have some of my illustrations printed out to display, but due to COVID-19 and thesis presentations being virtual, the GIFs and illustrations will be displayed in an online scrollable gallery format, with the viewer clicking or scrolling through and the GIFs playing automatically for a smooth transition from static to animated images. This will all also be posted on social media with links to the actual platform. All right, so some of my influences for this project include Studio Ghibli's Princess Mononoke, Cartoon Saloon's Secret of Kells and Song of the Sea, with their environmental themes, color palettes, storytelling, and textures, as well as some Twitter users like Loika, Ninejetit, Klaku, and Eli Baum, Vacuum Chan, Rika Paints, and Sanhome Draw, all for the ways that they explore mark making, composition, texture, and the addition of surreal elements. With my own personal work, it goes between animation and illustration. My portfolio includes character designs, GIFs, animation clips, and illustrations, all from the last 2 years. However, I have grown tremendously as an artist since then, and I see this thesis as an opportunity to update some portions of my portfolio. Here's an example of a piece that's done digitally, as well as a piece that was done using gouache and colored pencils. I would like to add more storyboards to my portfolio, as well as high-rendered GIFs. Here's 2 examples of early concept work that was done for my thesis project, both done traditionally in gouache. The second one on the right was also using colored pencils as an added textural element. And then I've also been working on integrating stronger color palette choices and traditional textures within my digital work over the last few years. These 2 pieces were exploring some of the watercolor textures out of a new brush pack that I got. And here is creating a strong illustration and GIF series using all of these tools to my advantage will give my portfolio an added boost. The GIF on the left was one that I completed earlier this semester, exploring small little GIF moments, as well as using more textual elements around the outside of the frame. And finally, here is part of the storyboard that I used for the short animation that I played earlier, as well as some additional examples of past animation I have done. All right, so the main characters who exist outside the gender binary grapple with the consequences of centuries of environmental abuse committed by the generations of people who lived before them and struggle to undo the damage that has been done to the ecosystem. By including non-binary characters and real-life environmental challenges, I aim to provide trans representation and educate young teens on the human impact on the natural world while emphasizing hope. Change is still possible. We just have to actively fight for it. Thank you all for coming to and listening to my presentation. I will now move on to the question part.
Are we clapping now? I don't know.
Yay! All right, let's moving into questions. I'll look for hands in the participant panel. Zach.
Hi, and great job. I do have some questions around 2 different components. So it's a 2-part question, both having to deal with representation of non-binary in the project. And I can see some coding already beginning to exist in your non-binary characters that starts to kind of cue them in as non-binary. I'm wondering what those strategies are and what particular codes you're beginning to explore as a way of making it specific that your characters are non-binary, and potentially within the community rather than, like those codes aren't always read outside the community, but maybe focusing on those that will be create that avenue of I don't know what the word I'm looking for is.
Yeah.
I guess the encodes, like what encodes you're playing with and beginning to use as a way of coding your characters as non-binary.
Yeah, so within the actual character design, when I started to kind of mess around and decide what I wanted the characters to look like, there's the whole like short hair, long hair thing. There's some face shapes that we read as more masculine versus more feminine. And then of course there's clothing and outfits that are more traditionally masculine versus ones that are more traditionally feminine. And so as I was working on these 2, I kind of started to mix and match different key elements where it's like having shorter hair on a character that has maybe a slightly rounder face or a slightly more chiseled face. And then also just taking a character that maybe looks more feminine and using masculine and feminine clothing. But overall, just kind of like mixing and matching and just taking those things that we automatically would read as more masculine and feminine and just kind of switching them around so that people just, or hopefully my audience will start to just kind of question like, which gender is this character? But ideally I don't even want to necessarily have to specify it within the actual story plot line, just having it be a normalized aspect of the story would be ideal.
I think another question I have around just kind of the non-binary representation, or that also, like, how that might also exist in your story structure, because even the structure of the story and how you tell the story, there are some very particular structures that are being looked at and understood as very masculine, or very from a very male lens, as the writers of them or the creators of them were male, and looking at story structures that may not have the same sort of narrative flow. So it'd be another place that I would push in, that's not even just in the design, but it's also in the story structure itself.
Yeah.
And then my second question was, in the very end, you kind of talk about what your outcomes are and how you want this to be presented. And I don't know if I missed this or I misheard, but would you expand upon what a digital display platform is?
Yeah.
Like, I guess, how is this going to live? How is this consumed by your audience?
So ideally, this would be set up as just its own page. And it would either be a horizontal scroll or be a vertical scroll, but so that basically your screen is just being filled up by one illustration or one GIF at each time, and you're able to click through to the next one. I have experience within my own work of running websites, doing website design. My dad is actually a coder, so I have all the tools needed to be able to figure out exactly how I want.
So you're going to custom build?
Possibly.
Okay.
That's kind of where.
Yes, absolutely. But that would be the best case scenario. You would custom build the site. The site would have a very particular functionality that would allow you to maneuver through each of them chronologically.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Laura.
Hi, thank you, Elias. It's really, really interesting project. You talk about the plot, and you mentioned writing, and from the sounds of it, I mean, you gave us a pretty good outline, so I have a sense of it, and it sounds like a very long story. Doesn't sound like an 8 illustration story to me. So could you talk a little bit about how you're going to fit this very long journey-based sort of saving one's community or world in 8 to 10 illustrations? And if maybe perhaps this is part of a bigger project, or what is the scope of it? And then what is the scope of this part of the project right now that we're talking about?
Yeah, so ideally, basically the majority of the work that would be done, I'm messing around and kind of being inspired by a lot of illustrations that are not necessarily just one single image, kind of like this little illustration here from Cartoon Saloon, where they have multiple elements kind of going on at once, where it's not just being limited to just strictly illustration, but also bringing in some comic elements, and using that as a way to kind of condense some areas of the story where it's like maybe going from point A to point B, where there's not really too much happening, just having it be one single illustration that shows them going through that area. And then as far as like being able to go through some plots or some points where it might be wanting to have more coverage, that's where the GIF part comes in, working with longer form GIFs, not just like little simple loops, so that there is kind of an avenue of animation going on where it's not limited too much to like a very, very short time, but also not a huge undertaking that requires a lot more work going into it.
Will there be any text?
I've thought about it. I would love it to be able to stand on its own without text implemented, but I am thinking that because there are some interactions between characters and between a new character outside of the other two, that some text will probably be used.
Thank you. Yeah, the explanation of it being more of a hybrid comic format makes a lot more sense to me, because you can add time, and a single page can have
Yeah.
many days or months even in it. So thank you for that clarification.
Jackson's hand up here.
Hello. So I just wanted, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure. I just wanted to ask, I know that I believe you showed once or twice. I'm sorry, our cats are playing with something. You have this sort of like a rabbit form taking place in your spirits and things like that. Is there any sort of symbology behind it, or is it just like, I like bunnies?
It's kind of like, so I've worked a lot with rabbits in the past. There was a rabbit magical character that was in my animated short film. And this is almost like a further development of that character, where it's a spirit that will pop up and kind of almost follow them, lead them, become almost a character in its own way, but just something familiar to tie everything together. That and rabbits are super cute, and you can have a lot of fun with the movement of them because they bounce so much. And then also just something familiar that most people can look at and identify immediately. So.
Cool. Also, if my hand raises again, Katie's also here. So it's not me asking a question, it's Katie asking a question.
You can ask all the questions.
All right.
I see Lauren has their hand up.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yep.
Well, I'd just like to say you're doing rabbits because of my rabbit. I know this for a fact. There's no way that it's not Columbo. Anyways, on that note, I was wondering if there was any opportunity or idea with the kind of concept of multiple different spirits representing different things throughout the story.
Yes. Which page did I have? Yeah. So basically, because the little orb draws things to it and it has the power to bring things to life, it actually can create visualizations of the spirits of things around it. And so you do get like playing around with, it was like messing around with kind of forms that are nondescript, but also bringing in the bunny again. And I would love to expand that into having some other animal spirits. Like there's a little lizard that I've been playing around with, just other little things to show that, you know, it's not just necessarily taking things that are alive and bringing them healthier, but also taking things that have kind of passed on and kind of pulling them forward into the realm that we can see.
Can I say a follow-up question for that?
Yes.
Now I'm kind of intrigued on, did you mention something about the spirits of animals who have passed? So like that they have lived is that what you're saying, or are they kind of their own entity?
Things that in the forest that die.
Okay, so and that's actually really interesting to me, and I'm wondering, is there any way to convey that, especially if you're not going to use text, which I think that's a very interesting challenge, and I think that's a great, yes, but like, I agree with you in that. I think not that it would hinder it, but try it without text. I think it would look good. But anyways, I'm kind of wondering how your idea of, if that's an important part of the project or the characterization, which I think it is because it's very interesting, how would you convey that within the final piece? How would you show the history or the kind of insinuation that these had a previous life before the beings that they are now?
I'm not entirely sure like how necessary that is in depth, but more just like in this short piece over here, I was playing around with having them be drawn directly to the orb. And so just messing around with, they're not necessarily messing around, but using the orb as almost a visualizer where it's like before they're with the orb, you don't see them at all. Like they're not there, they don't show up. But once the orb is in their possession, they're able to, or like those start popping in and you see them more often. if that makes sense.
It does. One last thing. Are you going to credit Columbo for being the major source of visual inspiration for your bunnies? Because
Of course, he's a model.
of course, I know he's a model. Anyways, love.
All right, I see Jackson's hand up again.
Surprise, it's actually Katie.
Hi, Katie.
So I have a question about audience.
Yes.
So you were talking about like experiencing like having non-binary representation as a young person, but you're also talking about posting it online in kind of a way that would maybe be more social media friendly, like a Twitter link or something like that that could like be shared around to an older audience, but it also has like kind of picture book aesthetics. So I'm just kind of wondering, like, who is your ideal market here, or are you just trying to paint as wide as thing as possible? Is there going to be like some more education based resources for maybe a younger audience, things like that?
Yeah, so my ideal audience would be younger teens, people who are just like, maybe they have their first account on like Twitter or Instagram or something, just kind of newer to the internet, especially since kids these days are getting on the internet earlier and earlier, and being exposed to things more and more. And then basically, because I already have social media platforms set up and I already have a good following on some of them, I would be posting this stuff directly on there or with links to the actual display platform so that anyone who follows me on there is able to go find stuff and look at it. But ideally, this work is, what I want it to be is like soft enough that it's very, very, very approachable for someone who is younger and they're drawn to it because it's a comforting style, similar in a way to a lot of the more kids friendly animation work, but also having more mature themes tied up within it and kind of like sneaking in the education, kind of like sneaking in like vegetables into foods for kids who are picky. But basically, because there's so many themes and stuff going on and there is more complex stuff underneath that soft style, that an older audience is able to really get into it and appreciate it as well. So like wide audience, but targeted. And then I would also just like love to have more like direct text education stuff tied up within, not like directly within the piece, but available maybe on a separate page on that same display platform. So it's like, if you're interested in stuff that's shown here, here's more information that you can read about, whatnot.
All right, I see Laura's hand up again. Oh, sorry, Saw, you were first.
I have to unmute myself. Oh, okay. Seeing that you came from the animation background and now you're in illustration, I think with so many tools under your belt, it seems like you want to pitch it all to the world. And in this case, pitch it and try to encompass it all into your senior thesis. And I applaud you for attempting to do that. But it seems like there's a lot of things trying to take your attention, and listening to your proposals, you have all these amazing ideas, and it just seems like within the time constraint that you have, what is the best thing that you can do to create the maximize exposure? For example, is it more ideal to potentially, when you're finished, instead of proposing it in a video format or an interactive format, is it potential to something where you can create like a little animated short with the visuals, even if it's more like an animatic format with some GIF moving around, to perhaps show it at Earth Day or something like that, where you get a bigger audience? Because it seems like your audience, even though you have this amazing visuals and amazing idea, your audience may be very little. because of the way it is currently set up. Maybe your platform needs to include potentially creating maybe a little animated short, and this is just the concept work for it. And if that's the case, is the concept work driving it, or are you still trying to do everything? I'm just a little confused. So I just want a little clarification.
You're all good. Yeah, so basically stripping everything down and just talking about just exactly kind of like what I'm aiming for and aiming to go through. It would be just kind of like basically following the story, like just following these two kids going along the path from point A to point B, meeting the mage, kind of going over, collecting the orb, and then starting their return journey back. And what I would love to be like creating in more like an animatic thing with both the still illustrations and then the kind of GIF segments within it, that would be awesome. I would love to see how that would look. Probably will end up messing around with that just as like a way to maybe put that like on YouTube or what's the other video platform site that's more artsy. So let's possibly
Vimeo.
There we go. Thank you. And kind of like that's what I want to explore a little bit more is just within platform types and exactly what the best way is to present this, since COVID is a thing and a lot of events and in-person meetings and whatnot are being changed and altered or outright canceled. And so at this time, I'm not 100% sure exactly where I want to go with that. And I have a feeling that that will develop and change as we move along in the work and realize more directly like what realistically can happen in terms of display. Did that answer some of it for you?
It's okay. We can talk a little bit more later.
Okay.
Laura, and I think we may have time for like one or two more afterwards. So
I think Za's question is a good one, and it's certainly one to work through as you continue. But mine was a lot simpler question. I love the introduction where you talk about where you grew up and the forest as a place you kind of go to, sort of as a comfortable, familiar place, and how you've seen it change. But also you speak to a bigger issue that's a global one of climate change. But the way you presented it is a very classic, in the look and feel of it, feels like it's timeless. It doesn't necessarily, in what I've seen, look like a particular time. It could be any time. So I'm wondering if there will be elements that will allow us to understand that either it's specific to Mount Adams, or even the Pacific Northwest, or will there be elements that let us know that it's about now or the time we're in now, or will it have this sort of anytime quality? Do you want it to say something to our specific time and place and to climate change and where we're at now?
I would definitely want it to have more of like a timeless feel where if anything, it would be more like an alternate universe than our own world, because there is this magical element on top, and that does take it a little bit out of our direct reality. And so it's hard to make that directly speak to exactly our here and now in any specific place. But I know inevitably it will have some ties to the Pacific Northwest, just simply because of what plants are going to be in what areas, because they're mostly inspired by ones we have right around us. So in a way, some of it will be more places significant, but I don't really want it to seem like it's a direct place on Earth right now, but it could be in the future. Yeah. And I think like basically when I've been working on like the costuming, I've been kind of aiming or going between like a mismatch of stuff that's more practical from historical fashion, as well as elements that are a little bit more futuristic, like maybe some cool gloves or different bags, shoes that are more updated, as well as different fabric types that are a little bit more updated.
So does our panel have any last questions you'd like to ask? Or the rest of the room? All right, let's all give Elias a hand. Woo! You're welcome to unmute yourselves or add. Yay.
Nice job.
Proud of you.
Well done, Elias.
Thank you.
Great job, kiddo.
Woo! Now she can hear us.
Thank you guys for coming.
All right, I'm going to ask folks who aren't on the panel to vamonos out of the room, and y'all can connect later. I'll just I'll give y'all a few minutes to get out of here.
Great work, Elias. That was awesome.
Thank you. I'll talk to you guys later.
And Elias, you got to check out the chat before you leave. You got a lot of ears.